The council chamber erupted into chaos as the holographic display zoomed in further on the lead vessel. Clara's heart raced as she recognized more than just the symbols. The design aesthetics matched fragments of human architecture found in the Proxima ruins. "Impossible," muttered Admiral Girax, his scales shifting from confident azure to a troubled violet. "These vessels don't match any known configuration in our database." Clara stepped closer to the display, her forearms steady despite the commotion around her. "Because they aren't in our database, Admiral. These ships match precisely what the 7th Dynasty texts described as human battle cruisers." The senior communications officer, a Vendari with translucent skin revealing pulsing neural pathways, pressed a receptor against his auditory organ. "We're receiving a transmission on multiple frequencies, including several we haven't used in millennia." The Grand Minister of the Council, a massive, dignified Tyrellian with age-whitened fur, raised all 6 appendages for silence. The chamber gradually quieted, though the fear pheromones remained thick in the air. "Let us hear what they have to say before we rush to judgment," the Grand Minister said, nodding toward the communications officer. The central holographic display shifted, and the council members collectively held their breath. The image resolved into a bipedal figure with smooth skin, bilateral symmetry, and curious flat features, exactly as depicted in ancient artworks scattered across 17 worlds. A human. "Greetings, Galactic Confederation." The figure spoke in flawless, high diplomatic Tyrellian. "I am Fleet Admiral Helena Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We come in peace, though unfortunately not with peaceful news." Clara watched Admiral Girax's reaction carefully. His secondary gills fluttered in what she recognized as suppressed shock. Admiral Chen continued, her strange, 5-fingered hands clasped behind her back in a posture that somehow conveyed both military discipline and diplomatic openness. "We have monitored your civilization from afar for centuries. We had hoped to remain in self-imposed exile, but circumstances have forced our return." The Grand Minister stepped forward. "You claim to be human, a species long considered mythological by many of our scholars." A curious expression crossed Admiral Chen's face, something Clara would later learn was called a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I assure you, Minister, we are quite real, as are the Void Heralds who have re-entered this galaxy through the Perseus Rift." The chamber fell deathly silent at the mention of that name. Even the most skeptical council members recognized it from the most ancient warning texts. Clara couldn't contain herself. The devourers of worlds from the Elder Scrolls. They were thought to be allegorical constructs, cautionary tales from the pre-Confederation era. Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "They are no allegory, Professor Clara Tembos. Yes, we know who you are. Your work on human archaeological artifacts has been remarkably accurate, given your limited resources." Admiral Girax stepped forward, mandibles clicking in agitation. "How do we know you aren't these heralds yourselves? Convenient that you appear with tales of ancient enemies, just as we detect your massive fleet." Chen's response was not defensive but patient. "A fair question, Admiral. We anticipated your skepticism." She gestured off-screen, and the transmission widened to reveal a second figure, not human, but unmistakably a progeny, one of the Confederation's founding species, long believed extinct after their colony ships had vanished 3,000 years ago. "Esteemed Council," the elderly progeny spoke, his crystalline voice pattern authenticating his species beyond doubt. "I am Elder Historian Kazul. My ancestors chose to join the human exodus when they warned us of what was coming. We have lived among them, building and preparing. What they say is true. The heralds have awakened, and they hunger for living worlds again." The Grand Minister's fur rippled in distress. "If what you say is true..." Alarms cut through the chamber again. The junior tactical officer's voice trembled as she reported, "Spatial anomalies detected in the Verdant system. Multiple unknown vessels emerging. They don't match the human fleet configurations." Admiral Chen's expression grew grim. "They're already here." Those aren't our ships. Clara stood nervously on the observation deck of the _Harmony of Worlds _ as it approached the massive human vessel. The diplomatic craft, while considered impressive within Confederation space, looked fragile and diminutive alongside the human flagship _Intrepid _. The human vessel's hull bore scars and repairs that told stories of actual combat, not the ceremonial missions Confederation ships typically undertook. Their docking protocols are surprisingly compatible with our systems, remarked Chief Engineer Trill, her bioluminescent appendages flickering with professional curiosity. Almost as if they designed their interfaces with our technology in mind. Perhaps they did, Clara said quietly, reviewing her notes one final time. If they've been monitoring us for centuries, they would understand our technological evolution. The diplomatic team consisted of representatives from 6 Confederation species, each chosen for their expertise in different areas: science, culture, history, defense, medicine, and diplomacy. Clara had been unexpectedly thrust into the role of team leader after her recognition of human writing systems had proven her expertise valuable. A gentle vibration indicated successful docking. Clara took a deep breath, filling all 4 of her respiratory chambers. Remember the protocols we established. No sudden movements, maintain the designated personal space boundaries, and most importantly, remember that human emotional displays may appear intense, but aren't necessarily aggressive. The airlock cycled, revealing a corridor lined with humans in uniform. Clara was immediately struck by their diversity, varying skin tones, heights, facial structures, yet all recognizably the same species. The ancient texts hadn't exaggerated their morphological variety. Captain Alina Reyes stepped forward, extending a hand in what Clara recognized from her research as a traditional greeting gesture. Ambassador Clara, welcome aboard the _Intrepid _. We appreciate your willingness to meet with us directly. Clara carefully extended her primary right arm, mimicking the gesture. The honor is ours, Captain Reyes. Your return has caused quite a stir throughout Confederation space. I imagine so, Reyes replied with a small expression that Clara identified as a smile. 3,000 years is a long absence, even by cosmic standards. The human led them through corridors bustling with activity. Clara noticed how efficiently the humans moved, purposeful yet relaxed, maintaining what seemed like organized chaos. Confederation ships operated with precise, almost ritualistic movements. The human vessel felt alive, organic in its operations despite its mechanical nature. They entered a conference room where Admiral Chen waited, along with Elder Historian Kazul and several other humans of apparent rank. The Confederation delegation paused momentarily at seeing the progeny historian, his species' distinctive crystalline growth patterns confirming his advanced age, well over 1,000 years. Elder Kazul, whispered the Confederation science representative, the archives of Xanthi 12 hold memorial gardens dedicated to your lost colony ships. The ancient progeny's facets shimmered with emotion. Perhaps someday I might visit them. It has been a very long time since I've walked on a Confederation world. Admiral Chen gestured to seats around a circular table. Please, be comfortable. We have adjusted environmental settings to accommodate all your physiological needs. Clara noticed subtle atmospheric vents and lighting adjustments. The humans had indeed studied Confederation species carefully. As they settled, holographic displays activated, showing star charts of Confederation space with alarming red indicators near the verdant system. Time is unfortunately limited. Admiral Chen began, her tone shifting from diplomatic to urgent. The Void Herald scout vessels we detected entering your space are merely the vanguard. Based on historical patterns and our long-range sensor data, you have approximately 14 standard cycles before their main harvesting fleet arrives. The defense representative, a stocky Torvaran with layered exoskeletal plates, leaned forward. Our preliminary scans of your fleet show weapons capabilities far beyond Confederation standards. If these heralds truly exist, why not simply engage them yourselves? Captain Rice exchanged a glance with Admiral Chen before responding. Because last time we faced them alone, we nearly went extinct. We lost Earth, our homeworld, and 17 colony systems before we understood what we were fighting. Clara felt a chill through her exoskeleton. You lost your homeworld. Admiral Chen nodded solemnly. What your legends call the mysterious disappearance of humanity was actually our desperate retreat after the fall of Earth. We've been rebuilding, preparing, and watching ever since, knowing they would return eventually. The holographic display shifted to show a recording that made the entire Confederation delegation recoil. The beautiful blue-green world, remarkably similar to many life-bearing planets in Confederation space, engulfed by ships resembling skeletal hands with too many fingers. The recording showed the planet's surface being systematically harvested, processed, and absorbed. This, Admiral Chen said quietly, is why we've returned. The Grand Council chamber fell into uneasy silence as Captain Reyes concluded her presentation. The holographic display froze on an image of massive shipyards hidden within the swirling gases of the Carina Nebula, the secret heart of human civilization, for nearly 3 millennia. You built all this in exile? Asked Council Representative Thomas, his gelatinous form rippling with disbelief. Our historical models suggested your civilization was pre-interstellar when you vanished. We were barely establishing our first colony on Mars when the Herald scout ships appeared, Rise replied. If they had arrived even 50 years later, we might have had established colonies to fall back on. Instead, we had only prototype vessels and desperate courage. Clara studied the faces of the human delegation. Their expressions remained composed, but she had been learning to read the subtle tension around their eyes, the slight changes in posture that betrayed deeper emotions. These were not the bombastic warrior gods of legend, but people carrying the weight of an almost unimaginable history. Admiral Girax, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Your story is compelling, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This council cannot commit our civilization to a military alliance based on historical recordings and dire warnings alone. Several council members chirped in agreement, their appendages moving in gestures of affirmation. A new human stepped forward. Commander Ishida, according to Clara's notes, their chief of intelligence. Unlike Captain Rey's confident charisma or Admiral Chen's diplomatic polish, Ishida moved with a predatory economy of motion that made several Confederation security officers shift nervously. We anticipated your skepticism, Admiral, Ishida said, placing a small device on the central table. This contains coordinates for a small Herald processing outpost we discovered at the edge of your territory. We've been monitoring it for 3 months. It's where they prepare harvested biological material for integration into their fleet. The device projected a series of coordinates that Clara recognized as pointing toward a supposedly uninhabited star system near the Cygnus arm. Admiral Girax's scales flickered through several color patterns in rapid succession, a sign of intense calculation. This is beyond our standard patrol routes, but within our jurisdiction, the Admiral noted. If I were to lead an expedition to verify, we would provide a stealth observation vessel, Ishida offered immediately. Your ship, your crew, but with our cloaking technology. They mustn't detect you, Admiral. Scout vessels like these report back to the main fleet. Grand Minister Thrix raised his wizened appendages for attention. This council requires time to deliberate. The return of humanity alone would be momentous. Combined with this alleged threat, we must proceed with caution. Clara noticed Captain Reyes clench her jaw slightly. Another human expression she was learning indicated frustration. Admiral Chen, however, maintained perfect composure. Of course, Minister, Chen responded. However, based on Herald movement patterns, we estimate no more than 26 standard cycles before their harvester ships reach populated Confederation systems. Time is not an abundant resource. As the council members began their formal deliberation process, Clara found herself standing beside Elder Kazul in the antechamber. The ancient progeny's crystalline surface reflected the ambient light in patterns that conveyed deep thought. "Your people believe mine extinct," he said softly, his voice resonating like wind through crystal. "We numbered only 12,000 when we joined the human exodus. Today, nearly 4 million progeny live among the human fleet." Kalera's secondary hearts fluttered with emotion. "The great mourning for your lost ships is still observed annually on your homeworld. And yet here I stand," Kazal replied, his facets shifting to what Kalera recognized as the progeny expression of sad irony. "The humans call it dramatic irony, when the audience knows something the players do not." He gestured toward the council chamber. "They debate whether to believe in a threat, while that very threat already moves against them." Kalera looked toward the human delegation, where Commander Ishida was having an intense but quiet conversation with Admiral Chen. "What are they really like?" she asked softly. "The humans, beyond the legends and your historical records." Elder Kazal's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been a chuckle. "Contradictory in all things, capable of both great violence and profound compassion. They argued for 3 days about whether to reveal themselves to you now or wait until after they had engaged the Herald Scouts." His facets darkened briefly. "In 3,000 years of living among them, I have learned only one certainty about humans." "What is that?" Kalera asked. "Never, under any circumstances, back them into a corner." His crystal lattice pulsed with ancient wisdom. "For that is when legends become reality." The Confederation Botanical Gardens hummed with activity as hundreds of citizens gathered around human cultural displays. Kalera observed from a raised platform, fascinated by the interactions. A human chef demonstrated their cuisine, explaining ingredients to a captivated audience of gastronorians, whose 4 stomachs rumbled appreciatively at the unfamiliar aromas. "Your people adapt quickly," noted Dr. Sanjay Patel, the human cultural liaison who had been assigned to Kalera. "We expected more fear, perhaps even hostility." "Curiosity is the shared trait among all Confederation species," Kalera replied. "It's what united us initially. Though I must admit, your physical demonstrations have caused quite a stir." They both looked toward the central field where human athletes were finishing a demonstration of something called parkour. The displays of jumping, climbing, and rolling had drawn gasps from the audience, particularly when a human female had leaped across a 5-meter gap that would have been challenging even for the most agile Confederation species. "Lieutenant Rodriguez always shows off," Paddle said with a small smile. "Though I suppose it serves a diplomatic purpose. Better to demonstrate our physical capabilities in a friendly setting than have them discovered in less pleasant circumstances." Kalera's communicator chimed softly. She checked the message and her exoskeletal plates shifted in concern. "Admiral Jurax's expedition has missed their second scheduled communication. This isn't like him. He's meticulously punctual." Patel's expression changed, the easy smile fading into something more alert. Kalera was learning to read these subtle human shifts, the slight narrowing of eyes, the minimal change in posture that indicated they were suddenly fully present in a way they hadn't been moments before. "When did they leave?" he asked, his tone casual but his attention clearly focused. 4 cycles ago. They were due to reach the coordinates your Commander Ishida provided by yesterday." Kalera hesitated. "The Council insisted on using one of our fastest scout vessels rather than accepting your stealth ship offer. Admiral Jurax was confident in its capabilities." Patel nodded, but Kalera noticed his hand move slightly to touch a communication device partially hidden beneath his formal attire. The gesture was subtle, but she had been studying humans carefully. "Dr. Patel, are you alerting your superiors?" The human paused, then offered a rueful smile. "You're becoming quite adept at reading us." "Professor Kalera." "Yes, Captain Reyes should know about this development." Before Kalera could respond, a commotion near the eastern garden path drew their attention. A group of Confederation youths had surrounded a human engineer who had been demonstrating simple mechanical principles. One of the devices, a spinning gyroscope, had apparently malfunctioned, spinning with increasing speed until it began to glow with heat. The crowd backed away in alarm, but the engineer calmly reached into the device, adjusting something within the mechanism despite the obvious risk to her hands. The gyroscope gradually slowed, its dangerous glow fading. "Weren't you concerned about injury?" asked one of the Confederation teachers, their voice sacs inflating with agitation. The engineer looked puzzled. It was just starting to oscillate out of safety parameters, simple enough to correct. "But your hands," the teacher insisted. "Oh," the engineer glanced down as if just realizing. "Minor burns, nothing medical can't fix in an hour." She immediately returned to explaining the principles to the fascinated students. Clara noticed Patel watching the exchange with a thoughtful expression. "That happens often, doesn't it? Your people taking risks that seem unnecessary to us. Risk assessment is different when you've lived in exile for thousands of years," he replied carefully. "What seems reckless to you is often calculated from our perspective." Their conversation was interrupted as Patel's communication device chirped insistently. His expression tightened as he listened to the message only he could hear through the discreet earpiece. "What is it?" Clara asked, recognizing concern in his posture. "One of our long-range scout ships just picked up a distress signal," he said quietly. "Fragmented and weak, but the signature matches your admiral's vessel. They're requesting immediate extraction." Clara's respiratory filters fluttered anxiously. "Where?" "Not where they were supposed to be," Patel replied grimly. "They're much deeper in uncharted space, almost at the coordinates where we lost contact with our own surveillance drone last month." He met Clara's 4 eyes directly. "Something forced them off course, Professor, and whatever they found out there has them running scared." The agricultural world verdant Eden trembled under unfamiliar shadows as herald vessels positioned themselves above major population centers. The Planetary Defense Coordinator, a veteran of 30 cycles of peaceful service, froze as her display screens filled with signals unlike anything in Confederation records. Evacuation protocols initiated in all southern districts, reported her second-in-command, voice wavering despite professional training. "Civilian transports are lifting off." But the officer stopped as new alerts cascaded across their monitors. Massive tendrils extended from the herald ships, plunging through the atmosphere toward the surface. Where they touched down, the lush green farmlands began to gray, the color draining outward in concentric circles like spilled ink on fabric. In orbit above Nexura Prime, Clara stood on the observation deck of the human flagship _Resilience_, watching Captain Rice coordinate the emergency response. The captain moved through organized chaos with practiced efficiency, issuing commands that her crew anticipated before she finished speaking. "Confederation vessels are 2 hours from intercept," reported the tactical officer, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "Their weapon systems are minimal." Reyes nodded grimly. "They won't stand a chance. Our fleet, Battle Group Epsilon, can reach verdant Eden in 43 minutes at maximum burn," the officer replied. "The rest of the fleet can follow in staggered formation, arriving over the next 2 hours." Clara watched Reyes make a decision in seconds that would have required a Confederation committee at least a full day of deliberation. "Deploy Epsilon immediately. Priority is evacuation support and containment. Engage only if civilian extraction is threatened." As orders rippled through the command chain, Clara approached the captain. "The Council hasn't formally approved military intervention yet." Reyes didn't look up from the tactical display. "With respect, Professor, we don't have time for formal approvals. 2 million civilians are on verdant Eden." "I'm not objecting," Clara clarified. "I'm grateful." That earned her a quick glance and the hint of a smile. "Good, because I'm about to ask something difficult of you. The Council respects your judgment. When Admiral Girax's vessel returns, we need him to corroborate what he saw. The heralds are moving faster than our projections indicated. We can't afford political hesitation." Before Clara could respond, a communications officer called out, "Captain, Admiral Girax's vessel just emerged from FTL at the edge of the system. They're requesting emergency medical assistance and secure docking protocols. Grant both immediately, Rise ordered, then turned to Clara. Let's hear what the Admiral found. Medical staff, both human and Confederation, worked frantically around the 17 survivors from Admiral Girax's vessel. The Admiral himself lay on a bioadaptable medical platform, his once vibrant scales now pale and damaged in several places. They were waiting, he rasped as Clara approached. Not just an outpost. A processing center. Hundreds of captured beings from unaligned worlds. Being transformed. His secondary gills fluttered with distress. We tried to maintain observation protocols, but our cloaking systems were inadequate. They detected us, pursued us through 3 uncharted systems. Captain Reyes stepped closer. What exactly did you see, Admiral? Girax's compound eyes focused with effort. They're not just conquerors. They harvest everything. Biological material becomes components. Consciousness is somehow preserved, integrated into their systems. His voice faltered. I watched a captured being merge with their technology, still aware, still screaming. A medical officer approached. Admiral, we need to continue treatment. Your cellular degradation is accelerating. Cellular degradation? Clara asked, alarmed. The human doctor looked grim. Some kind of nanoscale infection. We're containing it, but we've never seen anything like it. Girax grasped Clara's arm with surprising strength. They're coming for all of us. The humans were right. All this time, they were right. His voice dropped to a whisper. The legends didn't prepare us for the truth. As Girax was taken for treatment, emergency alarms blared throughout the station. Clara and Captain Reyes rushed to the command center where tactical displays showed the situation on Verdant Eden deteriorating rapidly. The first Confederation defense vessels had arrived and opened fire on the Herald ships. Their most powerful weapons dissipated harmlessly against the invaders' shields. In response, one Herald vessel extended a spindly appendage that fired a pulse of sickly green energy. The Confederation cruiser didn't explode. Instead, it seemed to collapse inward, its structure folding in on itself as if crushed by an invisible hand. Epsilon Battle Group is 17 minutes from intercept, reported the tactical officer. But the Heralds have already established 3 harvesting zones on the planet's surface. Clara watched in horror as the displays showed the spreading gray zones where Verdant Eden's famous farmlands were being systematically processed. Those areas, there are settlement hubs within them. Captain Rey's expression hardened. Patch me through to the Epsilon commander. When the connection established, Rey's voice changed, taking on a tone Clara hadn't heard before, steel wrapped in absolute certainty. Commander Taylor, new orders. This is no longer an evacuation support mission. You are authorized for full combat engagement. Protocol Omega. Understood, Captain, came the immediate response. Omega authorized. Clara looked at Reyes questioningly. You might want to prepare yourself, Professor, the captain said quietly. You're about to see why the Heralds feared us enough to drive us into exile all those years ago. The Confederation shipyards orbiting Nexora Prime had never seen such frenetic activity. Where shipbuilding once proceeded at a measured, almost ceremonial pace, now assembly platforms swarmed with mixed teams of Confederation engineers and human technicians working around the clock. Clara observed from a viewing gallery as a Confederation cruiser, formerly a scientific exploration vessel, underwent rapid conversion. Human engineers had somehow bypassed 3 separate incompatible systems to integrate their weapons technology directly into the Confederation power grid. They shouldn't be able to do that, muttered Trelvik, the Confederation's chief engineer, watching beside her. Our quantum resonance matrix operates on completely different principles from their fusion systems. And yet, Clara replied, gesturing to where the impossible integration was clearly working. Trelvik's sensory fronts twitched in agitation. The human engineer hasn't slept in 3 full cycles. When I suggested mandatory rest periods, she laughed and requested something called coffee instead. Clara had been learning that humans operated differently under pressure. Where Confederation species typically became more methodical and deliberate in crisis, humans seemed to access hidden reserves of energy and creativity. Her thoughts were interrupted when Admiral Girax entered the gallery. His scales had partially regained their color, though medical nanites were still visible beneath his exoskeleton, repairing damage from the Herald infection. "Admiral, you should be resting," Clara said, concerned. Girax dismissed her worry with a gesture. "The Council has formally requested your presence, Professor. They've received the preliminary reports from Verdant Eden." His voice softened. "It's not easy viewing." In the Council chamber, Clara stood beside Ambassador Chen as the recordings from Verdant Eden played. The footage showed the Epsilon battle group's arrival. 12 human vessels of varying sizes emerging from FTL directly into combat formation. What followed left the Council members in stunned silence. The human ships moved with seemingly impossible coordination, executing maneuvers that appeared suicidal until proving devastatingly effective. Their weapons, phase-shifted plasma lances and directed singularity missiles, ignored the Herald shields entirely, targeting specific points on the biomechanical vessels with surgical precision. When 3 human destroyers sustained critical damage, they didn't retreat. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the largest Herald ship, collapsing their own containment fields in synchronized detonations that created a cascading reaction through the enemy vessel. The recording ended with the remaining Herald ships retreating, leaving behind a partially harvested Verdant Eden, damaged but saved from complete consumption. 473 human lives lost, Ambassador Chen said quietly into the silence. Over 2,000 of your citizens rescued from harvesting zones. Grand Minister Thrix's voice sacs inflated and deflated several times before he could speak. The reports said your vessels deliberately self-destructed to damage the enemy. This is difficult for us to comprehend. The crews evacuated in emergency pods before impact, Chen clarified. Though not all made it out, those who remained aboard did so by choice, to ensure targeting accuracy. By choice, repeated Council Representative Sol, his photoreceptors dimming in disbelief. Your people chose certain death. Chen's expression remained composed, but Clara was learning to read the subtle tension in human faces. When facing the Herald's representative, sometimes victory requires sacrifice. Admiral Girax stepped forward. Ministers, council members, I have witnessed firsthand what awaits any world the Heralds successfully harvest. The humans' methods may seem extreme by our standards, but they are necessary. His scales flickered with conviction. I recommend immediate formal alliance and full military integration. Clara watched the council members exchange glances. The Confederation had maintained peace for so long that concepts like sacrifice and military necessity had become almost philosophical rather than practical considerations. Ambassador Chen seemed to sense their discomfort. We understand this is challenging for your civilization. The Confederation has prospered through cooperation and measured consensus. Humanity has survived through adaptation and decisive action. Both approaches have merit. Both are now necessary. Grand Minister Thrix signaled for a formal vote. One by one, the council representatives indicated their positions. When the final vote registered, the chamber's atmospheric systems automatically adjusted to compensate for the collective exhalation of tension. The alliance is formalized, Thrix announced. May the wisdom of the Confederation and the determination of humanity together be sufficient for what lies ahead. As the council session concluded, Clara found Lieutenant Rodriguez, one of the Epsilon battle group survivors, waiting outside the chamber. The human's uniform still bore scorch marks, and a healing dermal patch covered one side of her face. Professor Clara, Rodriguez greeted her with a tired smile. Ambassador Chen thought you might be able to help. We're organizing a remembrance ceremony for those we lost at Verdant Eden. We'd like to incorporate Confederation traditions alongside our own. Clara felt an unfamiliar emotion, something between sorrow and hope. Our peoples have different approaches to honoring those who have passed. Rodriguez nodded. That's why it matters that we do this together. Different methods, same purpose. She looked directly at Clara. Those who died buying time for evacuations, human and Confederation alike, deserve to be remembered by both our peoples. Looking at the determination in the injured human's eyes, Clara finally understood what Elder Kazul had meant about humanity's contradictions. They fought with terrifying efficiency, yet mourned with equal intensity. Perhaps that balance was what had allowed them to survive exile for 3,000 years, and what the Confederation would need to learn if they were to survive what was coming. The Combined War Council fell silent as the holographic projection completed its simulation. The visualization showed Herald forces converging on Nexora Prime from multiple vectors, their numbers far greater than anything seen at Verdant Eden. 14 cycles, Captain Reyes stated flatly. That's our window before their main harvesting fleet arrives. Defense Minister Quillar's tendrils drooped with despair. Even with accelerated production and human weaponry, we cannot fortify all approach vectors to Nexora Prime in that time frame. Evacuation of billions is logistically impossible. Admiral Jurax, now fully recovered and serving as Joint Fleet Commander, studied the tactical display with narrowed compound eyes. Then we must alter the paradigm. If we cannot defend effectively, perhaps we should attack instead. Clara watched Captain Reyes and Commander Ishida exchange a brief glance that spoke volumes. They had clearly been hoping someone from the Confederation would suggest this approach rather than proposing it themselves. Reyes stepped forward, adjusting the holographic display to show a different sector. Our long-range scouts have confirmed Herald staging operations in the Nix Nebula. They're consolidating harvested materials from outlying systems before the main assault. She highlighted a pulsing node deep within the nebula's swirling gases. This is their coordination hub. If we strike there, we could disrupt their entire offensive. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices as Confederation representatives expressed shock at the concept. Preemptive strikes violated centuries of diplomatic and military doctrine. Grand Minister Thrix raised all 6 appendages for silence. Captain Rice, what you suggest contradicts our most fundamental principles. The Confederation does not initiate hostilities. With respect, Minister, Admiral Jurax interjected, his scales darkening with intensity. Those principles were established during peacetime, by species who had never witnessed planetary harvesting. He gestured to the scars still visible beneath his exoskeleton. I have seen what awaits us if we maintain our traditional responses. The choice is not between peace and conflict. It is between survival and extinction. Clara stepped forward, clutching data crystals containing her historical research. Ministers, representatives, Elder Kazul, and I have completed our analysis of combined records. She activated a secondary display showing ancient astronomical data overlaid with human historical records. This isn't the Herald's first incursion into our galaxy. Approximately 12,000 years ago, they harvested nearly 2/3 of all life-bearing worlds in what we now call the Dead Sector. The display shifted to show the vast region of space notable for its curious lack of habitable planets despite favorable stellar conditions, a mystery that had puzzled Confederation astronomers for generations. Only 17 species survived that harvesting cycle, Clara continued. We believe the Herald's retreat to intergalactic space between cycles, returning when sufficient biomass has regenerated. Her revelation sent a tremor through the chamber, visible in the collective shift of postures and colors among the varied species present. Commander Ishida activated a detailed schematic of the planned operation. The offensive would require 3 distinct battle groups. Alpha, primarily human vessels, would establish the wormhole entry point. Beta, mixed human and Confederation ships, would secure the approach vector. Gamma, our specialized infiltration team, would target the coordination hub directly. Infiltration. Minister Quillar's voice quavered. You intend to board a Herald vessel. It's the only way to access their coordination node, Captain Rice explained. Conventional weapons can damage their ships, but only by disrupting their hive mind can we truly cripple their offensive capability. Clara studied the infiltration team roster as it appeared on screen. Captain Ray's name headed the list, alongside Commander Ishida, Admiral Jirax, and her respiratory filters fluttered in surprise. Her own name. Professor Clara's expertise in Herald communication patterns is essential, Rice explained, noting her reaction. Without her translations of the artifacts recovered from Verdant Eden, we wouldn't understand their command structure. Grand Minister Thrix called for the formal vote. Unlike the measured deliberation typical of Confederation proceedings, the decision came swiftly. The threat was too immediate, too existential for traditional caution. Operation Sunbreaker is authorized, the Grand Minister announced, using the human-suggested codename that had initially confused many Confederation representatives with its poetic quality. May wisdom guide your actions and fortune favor your courage. As the Council dispersed to their respective duties, Clara found herself walking alongside Captain Rice toward the Special Operations Briefing Area. You anticipated this outcome, Clara observed. You already had detailed operation plans prepared. Reyes' expression softened slightly from its usual intensity. Hope for diplomacy, plan for conflict. It's how we've survived this long. She paused before entering the briefing room. Are you certain you wish to participate in the infiltration team, Professor? The risks are substantial. Clara's forearms performed the gesture she had learned was most comprehensible to humans, a determined shrug. As you humans say, in for a penny, in for a pound. I studied the heralds for a lifetime through artifacts and records. Now I will see them directly. She met the captain's gaze steadily. Besides, someone needs to ensure Admiral Jirax doesn't attempt unnecessary heroics. His scales may have healed, but his judgment remains typically impulsive. For the first time since Clara had met her, Captain Rice laughed. A brief but genuine sound that transformed her features. Professor, I believe you'll fit right in with our infiltration specialists. Her expression sobered quickly. Though I should warn you, humans have an unfortunate tendency toward those same unnecessary heroics. The great plaza of Nexora Prime shimmered under the combined light of its 3 moons. Where battle damage had scarred ancient buildings just weeks earlier, restoration work continued day and night. Scaffolding wrapped around the historic Hall of Concord, a symbol of resilience amid unprecedented change. Representatives from all 17 Confederation founding worlds stood in ceremonial formation, their diverse physiologies creating a living mosaic. Beside them, human officers in formal dress uniforms stood at parade rest, their posture embodying the disciplined strength that had proven decisive against the heralds. Clara adjusted her ceremonial robes, still unaccustomed to the weight of the medallion that now hung around her neck, the Confederation's highest honor for valor, never before awarded to a non-military academic. Admiral Jirax stood nearby, his scales now bearing permanent patterns where herald technology had briefly merged with his biology. The patterns were considered oddly beautiful by many Confederation species, though Clara knew they sometimes caused him pain. The memories remained strongest at night, Admiral Jirax said quietly, noticing her glance. I still hear the coordination node's frequencies when I try to rest. The human doctors believe the effects will fade with time, Clara reassured him. Perhaps, though I'm not certain I want them to fade entirely. His compound eyes reflected the ceremonial lights. Some memories should remain painful, to ensure we never forget what nearly happened, and what was sacrificed to prevent it. Their conversation ended as Grand Minister Thrix approached the central podium. Silence fell over the gathered crowds as ceremonial illumination focused on the ancient leader.